Would you be willing to murder everyone you've ever known and loved for an infinite gallon of ice cream? You may have seen the Super Mario World cartoon. It was created by Deke Entertainment to somewhat mirror the Super Mario World video game for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. However, it featured amazing new characters such as Uktar, a young caveman child meant to be similar to the troublemaker Bart Simpson from the animated sitcom The Simpsons. However, there were some dark and disturbing secrets to the Super Mario World cartoon that don't get talked about so much today. As for why they don't get talked about so much today, there are several hypotheses as to why. However, the old Usenet forums offer a secret, and that secret is that only a select few have seen the original pilot episodes to the Super Mario World cartoon. They weren't terribly complicated, there weren't many jokes, and there weren't many scenes either. They were as simple as any standard episode of the Super Mario World cartoon, but they left a lot of people startled, confused, isolated, because they didn't have anyone else to talk to about the horrors they'd seen. There's one episode in particular that continues to haunt me to this very day. It's supposed to be some sort of cooking episode. The title of the show had something to do with long linguine. It was an alliteration pun on pasta, given it was Super Mario. That was no surprise. It featured Mario and Luigi sitting in a kitchen with chef hats on, and they were eating and slurping spaghetti that, well, it was kind of shocking and confusing. The linguine they were slurping on had snake heads on them, but they were built directly into the pasta. Yet there were hissing sounds overlaid in the audio. I didn't know if this was some sort of intern prank or some sort of dad joke gone horribly wrong, but I remember continuing to watch the episode. The episode was them trying to out eat Yoshi. If you've seen the show, you know that Yoshi's a big eater and he'll eat absolutely anything. It started with small stuff, but something I noticed is that every object they went ahead and ate was spherical. There were gumballs of various rainbow colors. There were meatballs. There were all sorts of spherical objects, one after another. There were even eggs, but they weren't shaped like typical eggs. They were shaped like spheres, except the yolks were dangling. I felt like there was some sort of message into all of this, and I would later learn that I was indeed correct. There was a scene, a big scene, a disturbing scene. King Koopa walked in with a giant, comedically oversized fork and knife and a massive bib. He began to sit down at the Mario's table and began to eat, and no one objected to it. Even Princess Peach was laughing, giggling, covering her mouth with her glove as if to stifle her laughter, but why? What they were eating sure looked like wrigglers. If you haven't played the Super Mario game, they're the caterpillars that are in Super Mario World. Yet on the show, they call them caterpillars and not wrigglers. Mario and Luigi are taking turns eating them, and then King Koopa eats larger ones, and they begin sitting there cackling as if it was some sort of amazing prank. I didn't quite understand. What was so funny about eating caterpillar segments? They were circular. They were spherical. They began to pulsate and vibrate. Upon closer inspection, the spheres seemed hairy, and they were sagging. King Koopa was naked. King Koopa jumped on the kitchen table and began to dance. Mario and Luigi joined in and they did a conga all over the kitchen table before they started playing Twister, contorting, convulsing, and throwing up everywhere. They were throwing up spherical objects. Were those meatballs? Gumballs? Caterpillar segments? They were writhing as if they were alive. I could see varicose veins just bulging, and it was lifelike. This was supposed to be Deke's low budget animation, not anything this realistic. Mario didn't have an accent. He stared into the camera and he began to say something. Mamma mia, that's one spicy meat ball. A different kind of meat, Luigi added. Peach added to their unusual remarks, meat, big meat, tender meat, juicy meat. Nothing can beat that meat, King Koopa responded, and they all chuckled again. This time, Peach didn't even begin to stifle her own laughter as a bunch of balls popped out of her mouth, one after one. They were plastic balls, like if you've ever seen Mr. Bucket. It was an infomercial with a plastic bucket with a bunch of balls popping out of its mouth, but these balls were darkly shaded, tinted, hued, kind of grayscale. I didn't understand. Suddenly, balls began to fall from the top of the ceiling of that Mario house. At first, it seemed like a reference to the Star Trek Trouble with Tribbles episode where those little fuzzy balls just started popping up all over the place and reproducing, but these things weren't alive, or were they? But they writhed. They rolled around in circles. They seemed to have minds of their own. The words in a gothic curved font, blood red, dripping all over the screen. The blood drips began to accumulate and drown every member of the Super Mario World cast on TV. Even Uktar began to groan. These are testicles, the words spelled out. Mario, Luigi, King Koopa, and Uktar, even Yoshi, they were all suffocating and drowning in the waters, and the balls were popping in and out of their mouths. Deke means dick, the word spelled out on screen. What was the meaning of this? Why would anyone want to watch this? Now, I didn't have a VHS tape. I was just watching major network television at the time. I turned off my TV, and when I turned it back on, Arsenio Hall's talk show was on. But I couldn't watch Arsenio Hall. Hall? Take out the A and put in an E. This was hell. I wrote a letter to Deke, and they told me they had no idea what I was talking about. They demanded an apology. I told them the only apology they would get is if I took them to court and lost the case. But even then, I already knew the shocking truth that there was something horribly wrong with Deke. You might have noticed that these days Deke isn't making these cartoons anymore. And there's a reason for that. Unfortunately, I can't really say too much because I signed a non-disclosure agreement. But someone who worked at Deke, a top-ranking official, opened up an Italian pasta restaurant not too long before the news first broke that they were failing commercially. Some customers thought they were eating meatballs, but wiser ones realized they were eating big, fat, hairy gorilla testicles.